So good morning, everybody, and welcome to another Rowing Chat. This is our podcast with and for people who enjoy the sport of rowing. I'm Rebecca Caro from Row Perfect UK, and today I'm joined by Larry Gluckman. Larry, welcome.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Now, would you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and how you got into the sport of rowing?
Certainly. A little over 50 years ago, almost a half a century, I started rowing for a Brit named Ernie Arlett, who came from Henley-on-Thames and started the rowing program at Northeastern University and was one of the founders of the Head of the Charles. Ernie really embraced the sport, and some of that energy and love of the sport became part of me. And soon after graduating Northeastern, I got involved in coaching and studying at Columbia University. And a little later on, was good enough to prepare myself to try out for the 1976 Olympics. I was the alternate to that event and in the 8-odd shell. And then I retired from active competition at that point. And by 1980, I got involved in elite rowing, coaching at Princeton and working with Chris Korzanowski, and was the coach of the pair and the double in the Boycott Olympics of 1980. I stayed with it. 1984, I coached the four in Los Angeles, and then spent most of my time focusing on collegiate rowing at Princeton and at Dartmouth, and then eventually moved to Dick and Pete Dreissigacker's house over in Concept 2 and worked for them for 12 years in product development and being their road man, visiting coaches. And then went back to coaching at Trinity College, had a great run there, and eventually ended up at Craftsbury, where I coached a new program called the Small Boat Training Center for Dick and Judy, Geer, and there produced some athletes who are now elite level athletes representing the United States. And after 2011, I retired from day-to-day coaching and now strictly do consulting coaching. And my most recent consultation was with the U.S. team at the U23 Championships in Bulgaria just 2 weeks ago.
And how did you do?
3 golds and a 4th.
Sounds like a pretty good output.
Yeah.
So, Larry, every coach has one thing that they're really known for. What's yours?
I think the area that I'm the most interested in is understanding how practice leads to optimal performance. And the phrase that I use is practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes permanent. So that if in fact you're not practicing at the highest level you're capable of, it's not likely that you're going to perform any better than you practice during your racing. So that's my emphasis. And I'm also a real observer of what makes boats stay fast. And so we call that developing free speed, and the technique that helps maintain that and the practice components that you incorporate in your daily preparation that make the opportunity for that to happen in a boat race. So I think those are the 2 areas. Practice makes permanent and trying to find free speed.
I love the concept of free speed. Tell me more.
Well, I believe that there are opportunities in practice that you should take advantage of. One is, and as we had talked before we started the show, practicing starts, for example. I'm a firm believer that every time you stop, whether it's to get a drink, to take off your jersey, to turn around, you practice a start as a matter of course. I'm not a keen supporter of the idea of starting every stop position from the release. I prefer to start with blades square in the water, say the commands to the start in your mind, and go off with whatever sequence you enjoy doing. It doesn't have to be hard in the beginning, but by the end of practice, if you turn around and it's the end of practice, you might take your regular start. But it's a matter of course. It isn't something special. The other area that I'm really interested in is perfect paddling. When you're the most fatigued, I encourage you to paddle with exact and perfect execution, because I believe that at the end of a race, you're going to take your strokes exactly the way you paddle when you're the most tired. So those two areas, making starts a regular part of your diet, rowing diet, and practicing perfect paddling, are two ways of developing and keeping speed.
That's fantastic. And I love the perfect paddling, because I have benefited myself being in a race where in the third 500, we were sitting last in the final and we came through to second, just because that third 500, we made gains through perfect paddling. We then had a good sprint too, but if we hadn't have been able to deliver that, I know that silver medal wouldn't have been around my neck at the end.
Congratulations.
Now, we know a lot of coaches listen to the Rowing Chat podcast, and you have explained now 3 really big core principles that are at the heart of your programs that you've run. How can a coach decide what's at the core of their program?
Well, I think there's a couple of points that a coach should consider. First, you have to know the players that you have. I think it's really important understanding the athletes who you're going to be coaching, whether they're juniors, whether they're university students, whether they're masters, whether they're elite athletes, is to have a firm understanding of who they are. From there, you can then begin to develop your program, both for the land training as well as the on-the-water training. And the expectation for improvements in technique have to be balanced against the athletes that you have. It may take longer to teach certain athletes than it does others, and you have to build that into your program. The second area is knowing your body of water. You need to be able to decide where the emphasis is on your program based on, do you have easy water to row on? Do you have water that can turn turbulent based on the wind? Do you have current against wind? Is it an open body of water? The way you set your boat up for practice in your conditions may have a lot to do with the success that you're going to have during practice. The third is understanding your schedule. If your whole year is based on 2 or 3 races at the end of the season, then you and the athletes have to get together and sort of say, we're not going to be as fast in April as we are the beginning of June. And we may take some lumps early on, but stay with the program, be confident, and you'll see the fruits of your labors. And then lastly is understanding the competition. There'll be some programs that'll have better athletes, but have tough rowing conditions. There'll be other programs that'll have perfect rowing conditions and not great athletes. And you need to just figure out where you fit into that and pick and choose the races that you want to excel in. And knowing the competition helps you better pick those races. And then finally, assessing at the end of the season whether or not the season has been successful, and do sort of like an exit interview with your athletes and say, what can we do better next season in preparing? Is there stuff we can do away from the water? Is there better drills? Is there better training on the water? And also, you may find out that the athletes actually consider a second, third, or fifth place or winning the B final as an actual good performance and be quite satisfied. So sometimes it may not be your expectation, but it's certainly the expectation of the athletes. And so it isn't a one-person show, it's a team show. And I think getting that information helps you develop your program. And be a great note taker. Take notes of every practice, take notes of sessions that you've been to with other coaches. If you ride in somebody else's launch, a good coach is a good thief. Steal the drills, steal the workout, put them in your program, and by that you have a better chance of using things that have been successful in other programs and seeing how they make your athletes either better or maybe something that you don't want to use again. But at least you've given it a shot. So I think being a good note taker gives you that opportunity.
And your note taking is just a notebook and a pen in your pocket?
Exactly. And keeping a log of erg scores, keeping a log of how many miles you asked your athletes to run, how many weights, what was the pre-row workout, what was the post-row. Do you do things that you can measure? So you just don't ask kids to do lots of exercises unless you know that somewhere along the line you could measure how it impacts their performance.
I certainly find measuring attendance is also really good. So when it comes to selection, you can say, hey, you missed 7 practices and this guy missed 6.
Right, perfect.
Now, I was fortunate enough to listen to another YouTube clip of you talking at Mike Davenport's Rowing Talks conference. And in it, you talk about scripting practice. Now, a lot of us love rowing and don't have enough time to do as much of it as we would like because we're not full-time athletes. So how can we start scripting practice?
Good question. I even scripted today's ergometer row for myself. I always write down the workout before I start. And the reason for that is I may not always get through the whole workout, but at least I know what the goal is that I set. So I think it's really important to jot down what you want to accomplish as part of your warm-up. You can name the drill or you could name the number of strokes you take or whatever, what the body of the workout is about, and what the cool down should be, and the post row. And if you write those down, one, you're a little more committed to doing it. It isn't off the cuff. You're not kind of dreaming it up as you go along. Second, if you can't get through the workout on a particular day, you might note, oh, you know what? My heart rate was really higher than it should have been if you're wearing a heart rate belt. Or I'm still fatigued. I find that as a master's athlete, I need a little more rest. And if I go back just 4 or 5 years ago and look in my log from my own personal rowing, I'm not able to do that series of workouts without throwing in a rest day more frequently. So I copy from one year to the next. If I'm successful, I go, well, if it worked last year, I know what I did. So by scripting, you can go back and check and go, what did I do the beginning of August that made me really good at the head of the Charles in mid-October? And if you had a good performance then, you have the script of it. For the athletes, I believe that if an athlete knows what they're going to do, then the expectation is very, very high. And so I used to post every workout. Kids came in and looked at it and said, do you know, I know this workout because I did this workout on the ergometer in January, and now it's April. I know how I'm supposed to feel. So if it's 5 times 5 minutes, they know. There's no curiosity. I wonder if I'll get through it. They got through it in January. they'll get through it in March or April. So that's the value of giving the athletes the information, as opposed to standing around at the stern of the boat before you go out and kind of saying, well, on the drive over here, I thought it would be a good idea to do 5-minute pieces. The athletes know that you've given it some thought. It's based on the previous night's workout, and they're more engaged. They buy in, and you can then really see if you selected the right workout for the crew.
I always found it very instructional myself. I had one coach who would stand at the stern of the boat and he would say, right, what's the workout for today? Because we all had the program and 8 out of 9 of us hadn't read it.
Yeah, well, then that's your fault.
Exactly.
Right,
yeah.
But I don't necessarily hand out the workout more than just a few minutes before the kids come to the boathouse, and I post it. That way, it creates a little excitement. Oh, what are we going to do today? What does Coach have up its sleeve? The coxswains get a copy of it. I call them together if I'm dealing with coxed boats, and I say, are there any questions? Do you understand this? Do you understand that? How are we going to do this together so that the practice is well managed and you get the most out of that particular row? When I'm in a camp situation where there is a level of uncertainty from day to day, I frequently like to give a few workouts in advance so the kids can mentally better prepare, because their survival in camp is based on their mental preparation besides their physical preparation.
Understood. So you have coached in lots of different places and you've had lots of cohorts of athletes come through your programs. When you're coaching a new crew, what do you do first? Well,
that's just like the quad that I coached over at the U23 games. What I did for that group of women, I had 9 women to choose a quad. 5 had sculled before and 4 had done a small amount of sculling. And what I decided on was the simplest technique so that I could bring the experienced kids down to a common level in terms of technique, because they were all different in terms of their abilities, and bring the novices along very quickly. And so I decided I would teach a technique that we would be able to row 36. And it was very simple. It was easy to describe and easy for the kids. So after looking at their abilities, I watched all of them sweep row, because the pair, the 4 and the 8 were the first boats selected. And if you didn't make those, you were then in the sculling pool. And I got to know what the kids could do. And I knew who the athletes were. And I decided that by teaching a very common basic technique, that we could elevate everybody. And once I taught that technique on the ergometer, I gave each of the athletes 2 sculling grips, and we practiced on the erg. I demonstrated, they tried it, and once we came up with looking in a mirror and seeing what it was, we then went into 2 quads. We started with 2 people sculling at a time, 3 people, and finally all 4, trying to rehearse the technique. Using the same words I did on land, where they can watch themselves, I use those same images and those same words on the water. Once the common technique was beginning to get digested, then I spent time with individual athletes working on the small things that would make it easy. For myself, I rigged the boats very common so that I could move athletes around, and the rigging was pretty consistent. But as we made the selection smaller and smaller, to finally I was with 4 women all the time, then I began to rig toward the individual a little bit. But in the beginning, it was very general rigging with a very simple style, very compressed style, so I wasn't asking them to do a lot, to make it simple so that they can. I think the simpler it can be, the more chance you have of the athlete picking it up. So that's the first thing.
You have a very challenging situation in the US, which is if you're picked as a sculling coach, the situation you described of people who have very, very little sculling experience, and it's probably more pronounced in the US, I believe, than almost any other country. So tell me, out of the 4 girls who made the crew and raced, how many of them had sculled, were in the more experienced group?
Okay, that's a really good question, Rebecca. Of the group that I worked with, 5 had never sculled, ever. 4 had some sculling experience, including the under 23 sculler from the previous year, from 2014. And I thought that I could build the crew a little bit around her because she is the most current in terms of sculling. But her stature and her style was a little bit different than sort of a prototypical sweep rower, because don't forget, these kids were initially brought to camp to make the pair, the 4, and the 8. And only 8 women were going to row those 3 events. So I started to build the quad around my sculler. I had one woman who rowed in the U23 quad the year before as a novice, and she hadn't done any sculling since then. I had a woman who was I had a woman who was a club sculler in high school, and now she's a junior in college. And I had a woman who was a junior sculler in a quad for the U.S., and she hadn't been sculling in 2 years. So the novices did a wonderful job up to about 26 strokes a minute, and we had very competitive quad rowing. The moment I got to 28 in doubles, the novices began to lose ground because it was a lot to ask to move a double at stroke rates much higher than what they were capable of doing. Inevitably, I ended up with the 4 women who had done some sculling before. And we tried the single sculler at the stroke seat, and her technique was different enough that the other 3 women had a hard time. I moved the quad sculler down to stroke, and she had a very basic technique that everybody could follow, and that's the way we ended up. And they had a good regatta. They were 4th, so 2 seconds out of the bronze. And I figured that with 3 weeks of preparation, that was a good performance.
It's wonderful. A wonderful task. So tell me, what would be your solution to this for US rowing, bearing in mind that the vast majority of your athletes come out of university programs and they don't scull because there is no competition for them?
Correct.
How could you make your job easier in the future if you get picked to do under 23 coaching again?
Well, the first thing I would do possibly is the people that select the women to join the select camp. This is a selection camp. They're picked by members of the coaching staff, of Tom Terhar's coaching staff. And they have a standard. The standard is 5'10", 155 pounds or 50 pounds, and being able to row under 7 minutes for 2K. And all of the women that came to camp were at least 2 out of the 3 of those criteria. They were under 7 minutes, they were over 150 pounds, or they were also over 5'10". And they mostly selected on their sweep rowing. If for the scullers, they went ahead and allowed it to be 7:05 or 7:10 and invite in 6 or 8 scullers besides 12 or 14 sweep rowers, and designate those scullers as only scullers, not competitors for the 8 and the 4 and the pair, then right off the get-go, a sculling coach could coach them. But for the United States right now, there's a lot of sculling going on at the club and junior level, and then it kind of gets lost when the athlete goes to university. There is a few regattas in the United States at the collegiate level, the Dad Vale, the Accra Regatta, some of the conference regattas that actually have a single scull as an event. But invariably, it's not one of the top 8 athletes in your program. It's one of the kids who didn't make the primary boat. Yeah. So I think if the standard were a little wider and said that you have to be a sculler in order to be able to be accepted into the selection camp, we might be able to produce more competitive quads. But the group of women I coached this year, no coach could have asked for more determination and more grit and willingness to work hard. So I enjoyed working with those women very, very much.
Fantastic. We had a great discussion on RowingChat with, you're going to have to help me, one of your colleagues who coaches at a women's university crew program who teaches them to scull first. He's a US selector.
Oh.
Michigan State?
Well, it could be either one of the Michigans. I think it might be Michigan State that does more sculling initially. Jimmy Dietz does.
That's the man. Yeah. So he wants to have a small boat sculling and sweep national championships for universities.
Yes, and matter of fact, when he goes south during his winter training, he brings singles and doubles, and half of his training is in those small boats.
Did you get any of his athletes were any of his athletes in your group?
We did not, and that's because of the very high standard of the ergometer and the size of the women.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you for that. It's always challenging, and it's always interesting that different countries prioritize different boats, right, and different countries prioritize different disciplines. So nice to hear your insights. Now we have a question now from Paul Townshend, who's asking, how do you deal with situations where you only have a small number of athletes in your squad?
And what's the goal? What is he trying to?
I'm guessing he wants to win medals.
Ah, okay. Well, the first thing, I've been in that situation, and is to totally understand what the goals of the athletes are. For me, to have that conversation allows me then to know where I need to do the motivating, how to motivate, and then set up a program where there's lots of success almost daily, that something is achieved every day, that somebody walks away from the boathouse saying, I had a great day at the boathouse. I had a great day on the Urig. I had a great day in the pair. And it could just be being able to balance the boat after doing a piece, and the coach says weigh enough, and the kids come to half slide, and the boat's balanced for 5 seconds, and the coach is, doing high fives and yelling and screaming because they succeeded in balancing the boat. And that's the beginning of the small steps. There's 2 expressions that we use with the athletes that we coached this summer. One is do more than is expected, and the second one is leave your situation each day better than you found it. And so if an athlete comes into the boathouse and does more than the coach expects, he's had a great day. If he leaves the boathouse and the program and he is better than when he came, he's had a great day. So in my mind, being able to set goals that are at the appropriate level, being able to do something that you couldn't do the previous day but you got done the next day, that's the way you build confidence. And from that confidence, you can keep building the work and building the expectation. And once you start building expectation, then the kids say, I'm better than I was a week ago. Give me more, coach. And all of a sudden, he may also decide, our coach here he may only have 5 kids, but he's got a really fast pair, and maybe that pair is the boat for the program, and he takes and he makes a double, and then he makes a single, and his 5 kids are rowing at their level, and his top 2 kids are the banner for the program, and the other 2 boats are his development boats. So I think managing expectation and managing ability is where you develop a successful program.
So, Paul, inadvertently, you've got an answer there that explains why New Zealand is such a challenging nation to beat, because that's exactly how they started. Small boats, they had Rob Waddell in the single, they had the twins, the Ever Swindell girls in the double, and then I think they had a pair. And then all the rest was behind and got built up later over 2 Olympiads.
Right. And they happened to have this guy, Hamish, somebody.
He was such a loser, and then he got to the front. In fact, his younger brother I was able to coach at a university, and he's now in the lightweight 4. So watch out for Alistair Bond in the lightweight 4. He got a great break last year at the World Championships. He was in the light double, and a guy in the 4 got injured during the regatta, and he was a medical substitution and got a silver medal.
And he had to row both, right? The double and the 4.
Yeah. Hey, right. We're going to take a short break and listen to a message from our sponsor. What's the top injury suffered by rowers at the start of the new rowing season? It's blisters. Yep, getting blistered hands is an injury. Not a major one, but certainly painful and a deep inconvenience. Until your hands harden and you develop new calluses, the best prevention to blisters is to protect your hands with rowing gloves. I find training camp, personally, the worst time for blisters, because rowing 3 times a day is more than I am used to. My cure is to row alternate sessions with gloves in order to build up resistance to the pressure on the oar handle, and also to protect my sore but unblistered hands between times. Row Perfect rowing gloves have elastic to grip your fingers with gaps at the knuckles, so it allows easy flexing of your hand. There are 2 palm designs, one with a textured grippy pattern for your feathering hand and one with a smooth palm. If you scull and sweep, buy 2 textured palm gloves for sculling and 1 smooth palm glove for your outside hand. Check out all our products for blisters on www.rowperfect.co.uk/shop and scroll down to the left side categories menu to gloves and blister prevention. Don't let blisters prevent you advancing your rowing. Now back to Rowing Chat with Larry Gluckman. Larry, I've got a question here from a lady called Elizabeth Kowalke. She is one of our most loyal listeners, and hello Elizabeth. What are some of your strategies for dealing with overconfident, cocky rowers?
I think every coach has some athletes that overestimate their ability. And for one, I think there is a time to actually sit down quietly away from the crew and sort of talk about the negative effect that having somebody who's supposed to be part of a team act in a way that puts them outside the circle, so to speak. And try to figure out, and I've done this at times, try to figure out why the person feels that they have to be that way. And I think it goes back to the idea of leaving your situation better than you found it. And you can ask the person, is that behavior going to help the whole team? And if it's not going to help the whole team, why would you continue to do it? And I think sometimes, you could put him in his or her place by picking out a particular workout that is very, very difficult, and maybe actually they don't succeed. But I would prefer to verbalize and discuss and see whether or not we could figure out, is there a way to take that, you might refer to it as cocky, you could call it a strong personality, and see if we can channel it in a way that the squad benefits by it, and that the person doesn't feel they have to be that way to stand out when they could do a better job being part of the squad.
Thank you, that's great. Now, another question from Paul Townshend. Got any recommendations for dealing with the winter blues?
Sure. You know, I coached at Dartmouth College, and Dartmouth gets off the water the first weekend of November and doesn't get on until sometimes after their first race. So they go race in Boston and haven't been on the water on the Connecticut. So their winter is very long. And I think when I coached there, we tried to take advantage of all of the outdoor activities. We did cross-country skiing. We did biking on ski trails with big tires that they could go and ride on the ski trails. We did a lot of running. We shoveled stairs, and we were outdoors, because I think the blues occur when you're indoors all the time and you're in an outdoor sport. And so no matter how cold it got, I was a student at one point at Wisconsin, and Wisconsin could be defined as a place for winter blues. And their coach was a guy named Randy Jablonic. And Randy had his guys run 4 or 5 times a week. And the temperatures were always near zero. And all the guys used to come to the boathouse with the Wisconsin Journal under their arm. And when they went out to row, they took the journal and shoved it down the front of their sweatpants, because they knew how running in the cold would affect them. And they would go out when it was sub-zero, and they'd run and run and run. And Randy would run them on Lake Menendota. He was on skis, and they were just in their sneakers and sweat clothes. And they all come back. They had red cheeks. They had frozen hands. And they were as happy as anything, because they were being physical outdoors, and they were all outdoor athletes. The other thing is making ergometer and tank rowing purposeful. So all the workouts we did on the ergometer were workouts that we were going to do on the water. And I would tell the guys, okay, we're going to do this particular workout. It's 30 times, 1 minute, 40 seconds with 20 seconds rest. And we're going to do this workout the first week we're on the water, and you better know how to do it. And so that workout didn't stand alone. It was a workout that had a purpose down the line. And I think the more you can do that, I think the athletes will respond. Second, in terms of ergometer rowing, be determined as a coach to teach proper sweep or sculling technique on the ergometer. If you don't have a tank, you can build an oar stand where you can put a sweep oar or 2 sculling oars, so you can actually scull while you're sitting on the erg. We built some for our novices at this camp that I was just at, and we put little rollers on the blades, and the kids could roll the blades right along the floor, and we taught sculling that way. So we were indoors, not because it was cold out, obviously it was warm in Princeton, but we were teaching sculling that way. And I think coaches have to be creative. Sure, you've got to get the long rows in, and it's monotonous, but don't allow the technique to be something that becomes a problem that you need to out-coach come springtime. Expect the most from the technique. You might have to give up a little bit on the score, but your crews will be better off because you don't have to teach it out of them come springtime.
So back to your under-23 girls, when you were teaching that very simple technique, can you describe the technique, please?
Yeah, I can. Since I had sweep women, I decided that the inside hand for both a port and a starboard rower was where the release would occur in the sculling motion. They had been sweep rowing from the previous September all the way through the season, and now June 7th, after the national championships, they come to me. And then for 3 weeks, or I should say maybe 2.5, they were sweep rowers. So I didn't want to change anything. So I had each of the girls sit on the ergometer, and I gave them a sweep handle. I have one right here. And right here where their inside hand was on a starboard oar, I swapped that out, and I put the sculling handle right here. So this is where they were most comfortable with their inside hand. I turned the handle over. I said, now if you were a port, where would your inside hand be? They demonstrated there. I then gave them a sculling handle, and I said, okay, right here, 5 inches apart, be able to see your elbows. That's your release point. We push down, we feather away. Keep pressure on the oar lock. Have your hands pull your shoulders forward, and then have your hands pull your hips to the entry, drop the blade in. And then go legs, back, arms. That was the simple, nothing fancy. We probably were the most basic looking crew at the U23 World Championships, but I was able to take these kids who only rowed 3 weeks together and give them an opportunity to be competitive. So I used their sweep experience as the foundation to move them into sculling.
And that would have given them huge confidence, because they'd have been able to sit there and go, I know that.
Right, exactly. And when they did something wrong, their hand went by their body or something, I go, would you sweep like that? And they would go, no, I can't. I'd hit myself in the belly. I said, well, then why are you sculling that way? So I was using their sweep experience to try to promote a basic technique that they all understood.
Fabulous. Now, most people row in order to do some form of racing, and most of us would like to race faster. So how can you shave a second off your race time?
Well, we all do that, and we all try to do that. I would start first by being comfortable in the boat, making sure that your relationship to the oar handles and the oar locks and your feet is something that is appropriate for your size and your ability. I was with a sculler this morning who's rowing an open water boat, and a neighbor of mine brought him over to where I live on a lake also in Vermont, and he brought him over and he showed me his boat, and he rows in a traditional rowboat, a wherry, but he has a moving seat, and his feet were not at the right height and not at the right angle. And the moment I made an adjustment for him, he began to scull much better. So for me, comfort in the boat, you might be able to pick up a second by just reorganizing. And one of the ways to do that is if you spend a lot of time away from the boat on an ergometer, be very particular to the relationship between the height of the seat and the height of your heel. Because in my way of thinking, if your heel seat height is correct, then you have a good chance of getting the right posture, the right compression, and the right upper body configuration that will allow you to use the muscles in the right sequence. That's number one. Number two is your boat rigged for you? In other words, if you're a very strong person, is your load on the oars correct? There are plenty of books in the United States. Mike Davenport has a book called The Nuts and Bolts of Rigging. He updates that periodically. He goes to world championships. He does a lot of measuring. And you might be able to figure out Oh boy, I wonder why I die in that, if we're talking masters rowing, I wonder why I die in that second or third 250. It may be that your rig is too heavy. Maybe you need to make small adjustments. You can call the oar maker or the boat builder. So configuration, right rigging. The next piece, as I mentioned before, is the idea of always incorporating starts as part of your regular diet. And I don't mean you have to go ahead and just practice start, start, start. Every time you stop, you start. So that when you back into a stake boat, you never have to worry, oh boy, I'm a little bit nervous, I haven't done starts. Every day you do starts as a matter of course. Even if you're doing a steady state workout, you have to take time to get off the dock. You have to take your sweatshirt off. You have to have a bottle of water. You have to turn around. All four of those are opportunities to practice a start. And then every day I practice one 1-minute sprint. Even if it's a steady state day and I was just rowing 18 to 24, I go ahead and I put 1 minute and I try to do 10 strokes at one rate, 10 strokes at another rate, 10 strokes at a third. And after that minute, then I finish my light paddle into the boathouse. So every day I practice my starts, I practice my sprints. Then finally, every week you have to have 2 days where you do a little bit of racing, whether it's off the clock, off the distance, 500 meters. You need to be able to experience the burn, that the excitement of that day, maybe even wear your race clothes on that day, that uni that you bought specifically for this weekend racing, and you then go ahead and you wear it. And in college rowing, if you lose on a Saturday, men's college rowing, you have to give up a shirt. Well, every Wednesday when I coached at both Princeton and at Trinity, Wednesday I handed out the shirt that they were supposed to wear for that Saturday's row. And they put it on, and they rowed in it all practice long. And it was a competitive practice. And it had their sweat in it. And they knew that they had worked out hard, and they were motivated to keep the shirt because they were invested. So even for a master's athlete or an elite athlete, I for a while coached John Graves and Ben Dan, who are going to be the U.S. representative at the Senior Worlds. Every Wednesday, I said, I want you to wear your USA uni. I wanted them to feel that they were representing the U.S. on that Wednesday, when it was a long way away from the racing. So prepare your body by doing the sprints and the starts, and then prepare your mind on Wednesdays and Saturdays to meet the competition. And I think you'll be able to scratch a second off your time.
Fantastic. I love that. Now we're going to shift on quickly to a question from Cindy Schertz from Coeur d'Alene in Idaho. She says,
I know Cindy.
Oh, cool. Well, Cindy, this is for you. When's the correct time to release or finish the stroke?
Well, Cindy and I go back a little bit, and for me, she's setting me up. My belief is that you need to take the blade out of the water when it decides to come out. And you go, well, that's obvious. Well, it's not obvious, because if you go ahead and you put the blade in, we'll say at 60 degrees, and you're properly rigged and your feet are in the right position, when your hands come to about 1 or 2 inches away from the body and 5 or 6 inches apart, the boat begins to pull the oar out of the water. Yet many of us keep our hands moving past our body, and we keep pulling, and we love the length, but we're really not adding anything to the stroke. My recommendation is I'd rather be a little bit shorter and firmer here at the release than to pull here and be pulling air and putting my body weight in the bow. So to answer Cindy, I would like to have the elbows out. Gordon Hamilton, Marlene Royal, they would be pleased that I would want to be pushing against the rigger and having the hands out, push down, never lose sight of your knuckles, never lose sight of your elbows.
Of course, people forget the natural buoyancy of the oar sits it slightly proud of the water's surface. And I think the lack of the diminishing ability of someone to work hard with their arms, because they are small muscles, means that that couples with your description of the oar starting to come out of the water. And you see people rowing along with about this much under the water, and it seems obvious that that's not going to aid fast boat movement.
I would agree. Totally.
Now, Linda Lewis from Hollywood Rowing Club in Hollywood, Florida says, please tell him he's just appreciated and he's terrific. So your fan club is working for you.
Thank you.
And we now
I hope to see Linda this winter.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, there you go, Linda. It's a great connection there. Now, Harry Harrison has asked us about where would you start with mentoring beginner coaches who are about to start coaching 14-year-old children who've never rowed before?
Yeah. Oh, well, first of all, they must have a heart of gold to work with that age group. And I applaud both the master coach and the novice coach for wanting to introduce those kids to rowing. The first thing I would do is I would find people who have a tremendous sense of humor, because I think that by having fun with the athletes, with the prospective rowers, that is what's going to bring them back. When I used to teach elementary school physical education, and my mentor coach used to say, do the best thing last, the thing that everybody laughs and has a good time about, because that's what they'll remember the most when they come back to class. And so fun is the most important thing. Also, being able to use the rowing ergometer or some form of ergometer or some body exercise that gives them the idea of rowing before they get into the shell, so that you can say words on land and put hands on the athlete to be able to move them around and say, this is this part of the stroke, or this is that part of the stroke. I'd almost like make it a quiz. You could say, okay, everybody, almost like Simon Says. Simon Says, go to the entry, go to the catch, go to the release, get body angle, etc., 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 and make it into a game, so that when you get on the water, when you say get to the entry, everybody laughs and says, oh, I know where that is. That's when my knees are up against my chest. So I think the idea of finding coaches who have a sense of humor, that don't mind repetition, that their goals are very, very simple. They don't mind all the crazy timing that novices have. They don't mind having to stop and start again. They don't mind stopping the crew and making a joke. And maybe just getting out and being able to get off the dock, take one or two strokes, turn around and land may be all you can do in the course of a workout. Those types of people who have high expectations but are able to modulate them down to the athletes that they have are going to be your best coaches. And the mentor of those coaches should always be around to make sure that the humor stays as part of the teaching technique.
Fabulous. And Harry, I would add that we have a cute ebook in the Row Perfect store called Games and Challenges for Young Rowers, which would be a good learning material, along with the Nuts and Bolts Guide to Rigging, which Mike Davenport allows us to sell as well.
Perfect.
Now, this is my question, and I'd like to know, how can you teach an oarsman how much distress his body can take?
Yeah, well, that's a really good point. And I think it has to be in small bites. I have a series. I created I had a crew that went to Henley and rowed in the Temple Challenge. It actually had the two Graves boys in it, Peter and Tom, both who represented the United States. And they were at Trinity. And one of the things that I did was I gave them a series of workouts that really tested their ability to push themselves. And I was fortunate enough, we took them to Princeton. And when I coached at Princeton, I was a severe note taker. I pulled out in 2005, I pulled out my notes from 1984, 1985. And I said, this crew went to Henley, rowed in the final of the Grand. Their times for 500 on this body of water were such. And I let them know that effort, what that effort was. And I said to the boys, they got through three pieces, 3 500s out of 6. And I said to them, boys, I said, in 1985, I could only do 4 workouts, 4 500s of the 6 with the athletes I had then. And I said, do you know why? And I have a habit of sending the crew in early if I don't think the practice is going well, because practice makes permanent, and I didn't want kids to work at anything less than their maximum. And I said, no, it was just the opposite. I was fearful that they were going to leave their boat race on Lake Carnegie because they were rowing so hard. And I said, but you guys, I'm on the verge of sending you in because you're not rowing hard enough. And I said, it's your option. You can go in and we can call it a day, or you could come back. And I said, the watch is the best coach. And you need to get at least within a couple of seconds of that crew. And that's all I had to really say, because the competitive nature of the people in that boat gave them a standard. And so there's the reason for keeping notes and keeping the results of workouts, is so that you could go to a group of athletes and say, you know, that's pretty good, but that's not the standard. And the standard means you need to go into the hurt locker a little bit, and you need to understand that your body, you've trained it so much that being able to go that deep is a reflection of your preparation. You should be proud of that. And it isn't because you're not trained, it's because you're so well trained that you can row that deeply into your fitness. And you do that over time, and all of a sudden they begin to understand what the work is. And it's not easy because kids will avoid it, but if it can be associated with success, do more than expected and make today better than tomorrow, than the day before, kids will begin to understand.
That's a perfect synchronicity back to the things you opened the podcast with. Practice makes permanent, and what makes boats stay fast, free speed. So thank you. It's been a delight, and I've learned so much listening to you, Larry. Can you let the listeners know where they can connect with you?
Sure. My email address is gluckmanlarry@gmail.com. I do not have a Twitter or a Facebook account.
No worries. Now, Larry has kindly donated a range of possible prizes for our free prize draw winner this month. There is either a Power 10 USA rain jacket, which he was given when he was inducted, a USA rowing hat from this year's Under-23 Championships, or a 50th anniversary Head of the Charles Golf shirt. And the sizes for the shirt and the jacket are between large and extra large. So I'll be putting that on the Row Perfect website. Everyone who is subscribed to our newsletter list goes into the free prize draw each month. And believe me, the drawing is random. A machine does it, not me. Now, we welcome comments and suggestions for new episodes of Rowing Chat, or if you've got any further questions for Larry from this episode, please do so through his email or info@rowperfect.co.uk. Past episodes are available online at rowperfect.co.uk/rowingchat, and you can follow us on Twitter or Facebook. RowPerfect or RowPerfect UK will find us. Please subscribe to our feed in iTunes, SoundCloud, or YouTube. Just search for Rowing Chat. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review and share this with your club mates. That will help other rowers get more enjoyment from their rowing. For more information about RowPerfect UK and its educational services for coaches, coxswains and athletes, go to rowperfect.co.uk and see you next month. Bye-bye.